Good morning, welcome to White Threads FlossTube number 40. Today I thought that I would show you some of my old examples of Mountmellick embroidery that I have collected over the years. So the first one I have for you today is a night dress case. Hopefully you can see most of that. Right, I think you can probably see most of that now. It's a night dress case that I bought on eBay, and it's got some interesting features that I will show to you. Okay, so it's got lots of leaves, there are blackberries, there are flowers, and then there's a monogram in the top center which says KJ. Now the stitches that are used on this are, we've got coral knot stitch here. This here looks like Indian filling on these leaves. We've got French knots obviously, palestrina stitch, long armed feather stitch, bullions, what else have we got? Cable plait stitch here, and buttonhole around the edge. So you can see that it's got the typical scalloped edge around the edge of the piece, and then it's got the Mountmellick knitted fringe added on to the edge of that buttonhole stitch. Underneath here it's blank except for the bit that you see at the bottom, and they would have done that because why bother stitching where it's going to be covered up anyway. On the back there isn't any embroidery except, no, there isn't any embroidery at all. It's just sewn onto the back. There's no buttonhole edging there as well. So that's a night dress case, and it would have been to put your night dress in during the daytime to make sure it's nice and safe. Why it wouldn't have been nice and safe, I have no idea. Don't know who was going to come and nick it from under your pillow, but anyway, they had these, and that was a lovely thing to own and to use. So this was a piece that I found on eBay. Finding pieces of Mountmellick embroidery on eBay is not something that I would bother doing anymore. Most of the stuff that's on eBay that's named as Mountmellick embroidery has nothing to do with Mountmellick embroidery at all. It seems that eBay sellers have no idea what Mountmellick is, and anything that's white and probably floral gets called Mountmellick embroidery if they can't figure out that it's something else fairly obvious instead. So if you go looking for Mountmellick embroidery on eBay, do not believe a word that you say and read. It's probably all wrong. You'd be very, very, very lucky to find something worthwhile there these days. I was extremely lucky. I bought this probably maybe 15 years ago, and it is a beautiful example of the embroidery. It's done on very fine cotton satin jean. I don't know if you can see that. There we are. Yep, you should be able to see how finely woven that is. It's a very heavyweight fabric. We can't get cotton satin jean that's that fine anymore. There are some beautiful cotton satin jeans out there, but they're not as fine as these ones were, the old ones. And that is the way with so many of the old embroideries. We just can't get the fabrics anymore. Now this one here is it's probably a pillow sham. I'm going to try and get it in screen for you. Oh. I'm not very good at this, sorry. Okay, that's most of it. It's a pillow sham, again, worked on fine cotton satin jean. It's not quite as nice fabric as the one on the night dress case. This is worked in a pearl cotton, so that is not typical at all. The cotton should be completely matte, as it was on the night dress case. This has daisies on it, as you can see, and I bought this at an antique store in Hobart in Tasmania. I think it was called Kookaburra Antiques. It may still be there, I don't know. Whenever I go to an antique store, I look to see if there's any old textiles, and occasionally you'll find some Mountmellick there. So there was Mountmellick in Australia. This was probably not done in Ireland, but probably more likely done in Australia. It doesn't have the distinctive knitted fringe around the edge. And that may be because maybe they didn't like it. Maybe they didn't have enough wool, well, it's not wool, enough yarn to knit it with, because it is very thread hungry. And maybe they didn't know how to knit. I find that very hard to believe, but it's possible. Maybe they didn't. So this was done in pearl cotton, which is not typical. The cotton that you use for Mountmellick embroidery should have no shine at all. This one does. And that's one of the reasons why it makes me think that it was done in Australia, because they possibly couldn't get the right thread, whereas pearl cotton was available. Now, the thing that I've always really found amusing about this one is that every single one of the bullion stitches is wrong. It's got the wrapped section, and there's a thread of, well, there's a stitch that comes down the side of every single one of those bullions. So the person that made this didn't actually know how to do bullions. On the back of a bullion stitch, you should see 2 stitches behind each bullion because of the way the stitch is done. It goes behind once and then it comes back again. And this one only has 1, and then at one end there's a tiny little stitch. So instead of taking their thread right behind, they came out right next to where they went in and went back from there. Now, I've tried doing a bullion like that just to see how people get these ones with the thread along the side, and I have no idea how they actually managed to make it happen, because you have to really target your thread to get it to work. So I would suggest that the person that made this had a horrible time with their bullions, because every single one of them they probably had to pull and tug, and it wouldn't have been pleasant. So this design with the daisies on it is quite a standard design. I've seen quite a few of them with this, and usually you'd have it in one corner and then the opposite corner. So this has got a larger design down this end here, and then a smaller, more simplified design at that end. And daisies were a very common motif that they would use. The stitches that are used on this, obviously we've got the bullions, which I already mentioned. We've got some satin stitch here. We've got stem stitch where the stems are. There's buttonhole stitch around the edge of those leaves there. And up here we have, there's chain stitch around there. There's small feather stitch there. There's all these lovely bullions with their mistake. There's French knots there. There's a double feather stitch there. And in the center of the flowers here, we have a couched lattice. So lots of interesting stitches there, all of them quite typical of what was used. It's just that the thread isn't typical on this one. It shouldn't have any shine, it shouldn't be pearl cotton. Okay, so that's that one. Now we've got another pillow sham, which is very much a similar thing, except this time it's got tiger lilies on it. Now, can you see all of that? No idea. Not very good at this. Okay, that's probably about as good as we're going to get it. I think you can see most of it there. Okay, so the first thing about this that's not typical is that it has a bobbin lace edging. When I went to England and Ireland to research Mountmellick embroidery, I knew that they had 2 examples of Mountmellick in the V&A in London, so I went and saw them, and neither of them have the typical edging. And because that's one of the biggest museums in the world, when people have searched for a Mountmellick image to put in a book, say on whitework, they've usually chosen one of those pieces. One of them has bobbin lace around the edge, which is not typical, and the other one has crocheted lace around the edge. Neither of them are typical. And so the 2 examples that are most likely to turn up in books are not typical examples of what Mountmellick is like. Mountmellick should have the knitted fringe, and it shouldn't have a lace edging like this. So yeah. The other thing about this is that the thread that they've used is a stranded cotton, again leading me to believe that this was probably made in Australia rather than in Ireland and brought here, because the thread is not typical. The fabric is typical. It's a lovely fine cotton satin jean. It's actually a lighter weight than some of the other ones because I can see through this. I'll try and get it so you can see the light through it. So you may be able to see that there's quite a bit of light coming through that. It's not as heavy as some of the other ones. The stitching on this, there is some very fine stitching on the petals there of the tiger lilies. That's a buttonhole filling, a detached buttonhole filling, and that is quite beautiful. It's also very fine for Mountmellick embroidery. Mountmellick embroidery is usually quite heavy and chunky, and that bit's not. They did occasionally use a buttonhole filling, and I'd say that was to give some sort of relief between the heaviness of the heavy stitching and the heavy thread, and something very light and dainty. But Mountmellick's not dainty. It shouldn't be dainty. So it's not really, really typical, but they did do it. Now, the other thing is that all of the motifs in Mountmellick embroidery generally come from plants that were grown or grew in and around the town of Mountmellick. It's quite a cold place at some times of the year, and tiger lilies would have only been grown in hothouses, but they loved them, and so they used them. And while they wouldn't have grown naturally there, they are one of the favoured motifs in Mountmellick embroidery. So you can also see that this has quite a greyish cast to it. So the pattern has been drawn on with something quite dark, and it's left quite a greyish cast to it. It's a bit of a pity. It was like that, you can see it quite well here because the bullions that they've got have moved out of place. And so you can see that there. I'd say it's probably a pen that they've used. I bought this at a little, antique store in Windsor, which is northwest of Sydney. And it was this grey when I got it. I have boiled this using the method that they would use, which is to steep it in cold water and then wash it with soap flakes and boil it and boil it and boil it and boil it until the water goes clear. So you replace the water, you boil it again, replace the water, boil it again, replace the water until the water goes clear. And I wanted to see if some of that black would come out. Well, it hasn't. So that is the way it is. And that is a tale of why you should not use heavy black lines when you're tracing your embroidery, okay? Cautionary tale, don't do it. It will be there forever. So some of the stitches that I can show to you on this, I've already pointed out the buttonhole filling. We have lots of beautiful bullions here. They don't have the thread along the side, so this person knew how to do them properly. There's lovely tall ones going up to, well, I suppose they are the stamens. I don't know, maybe they're going to the stamens. No idea. My sister would know, she's a botanical artist. She's the Prue Scott that I wrote the book with, and I wrote it with her because she's a botanical artist and an embroiderer. So we had her expertise. This is padded satin stitch here. We've got cable chain stitch here, which is a lovely, interesting one. It's a variation of cable plait stitch. What else have we got? Well, we've got French knots on top of the buttonhole filling there. We've got long-armed feather stitch here. What else have we got? Oh, there's some little buttonhole along the edging here. This is beautiful stitching. It's just not the right thread. This is cable plait stitch here, which also looks beautiful. Looks like they've left off a leaf there. Oops. Oh well. What else have we got? There's some lazy daisies or single chains here. Stem stitch. I probably already mentioned that. No, maybe not. Yeah, that's about it. So it's got a lovely amount of different stitches on it. Round the edge is a buttonhole, a scalloped buttonhole edging to which the lace is sewn. That should be knitted fringe sewn there. But yeah, so there's some of the examples of Mountmellick embroidery that I have. I do have a few others which are not so spectacular and beautiful, and there's lots of reasons why they're not typical. So yeah, I just thought that would be interesting for you to see the way people have interpreted Mountmellick embroidery with what they have. So these people had the right fabric, they didn't necessarily have the right thread. But they used it anyway. You can see that they are Mountmellick embroidery rather than being something else that someone's just called Mountmellick, because all of the designs that they've used, the motifs, are typical motifs. And the way they've been put onto the fabric, like in the corners of the pillow sham, that's quite typical. And the fact that they are pillow shams and a night dress case, that's what they did Mountmellick on. They were some of the typical things that they would use it on. So these are really good examples of Mountmellick embroidery. So if you are in a, what's the word? I can't remember this every single time. If you are in an antique shop and they do appear to have textiles, just always have a little sort through. You never know what you might find, even if it's not something that you want to take with you. Even if you've just seen some close up for real, that would be a lovely thing. So it's not something that you might necessarily want to add to your collection. You might not collect textiles, but if it's something that you see, take the opportunity and have a good look at it and see what you can see about it. See if you can identify whether it definitely is Mountmellick. So have some fun with that. So I hope that's been informative for you today. You've seen some things that you wouldn't have seen before. If you have any questions, please just ask. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, I would absolutely love it if you did. The more people that subscribe to my channel, the more people that comment, the more people that like the videos, the more people YouTube will show them to. And that means more people can get to see this stuff and learn from it as well. So I would love it if you would support my channel in that way. So thank you very much for joining me again today, and I'll see you next time. Bye.